OK, the very latest from the Prime Minister this morning, who has just touched down in Abu Dhabi. He's been saying that there is no way Ukraine is going to join NATO any time soon. But he also stressed that the decision has to be for the country's president to take. Well, let's talk about all of this with our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who joins us this morning in the studio. Good morning to you, Tom. So the Prime Minister flying into the UAE and then heading to Saudi Arabia, obviously trying to find alternative sources to wean us off Russian oil. But let's talk first of all about that line about NATO. Interesting to hear him say that.
It's interesting. Of course, he spoke to President Zelensky yesterday at the Joint Expeditionary Force meeting with the heads of state heads of government of a number of countries, the Baltic, the Nordic countries as well, who were all in London. Zelensky addressed them and, of course, were having conversations about how an agreement in terms of peace could be reached. And it seems like this is a very far-fetched thing at the time when the Russians are brutally bombing Ukrainian cities and really having quite a horrendous, albeit slow, advance through Ukraine. It seems odd to be talking about how peace could be achieved, but Zelensky seems to be erring on the side of potentially not joining NATO. Of course, the British position is unchanged, that this is a sovereign choice for the Ukrainian people. But in a recent poll that came out just last week, where an American firm took the opinion of Ukrainians, it found particularly foreign leaders like Boris Johnson were quite popular. Zelensky, 80+% approval in that country. But NATO, surprisingly, not very high approval in Ukraine at all.
Well, there's no fly zone.
Potentially, the Ukrainian people feel like now is not the moment for this, and that could be an olive branch that could begin to maybe, just maybe, end this horrific affair.
Interesting. OK, well, we'll come back to NATO in a moment because there's this big meeting going on in Brussels, but sticking with the Prime Minister who's just landed in UAE. A controversial trip, lots of people saying he's going from the arms of one controversial character into the arms of another. Just tell us a little bit about what his aims are and what could hopefully be achieved.
Well, it's interesting. This morning, Number 10 are downplaying the aims and aspirations of this trip. Of course, Saudi Arabia doesn't control how much oil it exports by itself. It's a member of OPEC, that cartel of many countries that try and control the global oil price. So this needs to be a wide international discussion, and quick changes on this are very, very hard to achieve. So the line from Number 10 this morning is not just, of course, talking about oil and gas with these countries, but also talking about investment deals, talking about many other issues that the United Kingdom may well come away from this without a big win on oil, but a win on some other things. And of course, there's been a lot of pressure to raise the human rights abuses, particularly in Saudi Arabia.
But, you know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, Tom. You know, when you just touching there upon the human rights issues, he's going to gently ignore those, isn't he?
Well, there's been a huge amount of pressure within the United Kingdom for the Prime Minister to raise those issues and to raise specific issues with MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Whether or not he will raise it in the generality or the specific is a big question, because, of course, Khashoggi, the journalist who was murdered, allegedly at the direct orders of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That is a specific issue that the Prime Minister has come under pressure to raise. Whether he will raise it in the specific is less certain.
The Saudis always claim those that were responsible were tried, but the West doesn't accept that, do they? So the Prime Minister out of town for Prime Minister's questions today. Who can we expect to be standing at the dispatch boxes?
Well, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab will be taking the Conservative side, and Deputy Labour Party leader Angela Rayner will be taking the Labour Party side. So it will be an interesting affair. Dominic Raab, often someone who's seen as pretty mild-mannered and level-headed. Angela Rayner seen as more of a firebrand. So that could be a very interesting issue to watch, not only on the subjects that the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party will go on. Will it be the economy? Will it be refugees? Will it be something a little more left field? But also the way in which it's done. Will this be a bit more of a fiery PMQs than we're used to, perhaps, from the Labour side?
Ben Wallace won't be there on the front bench. He's in Brussels, as we were saying, at this NATO meeting. Lots of discussion from the defence ministers about possibly sending more assets into Eastern Europe. Is that likely to be announced?
It seems that this is likely because what we've seen over the last few weeks is enormous domestic pressure. I think more pressure from particularly continental European countries than anyone would have expected several weeks ago. The idea seems to be to continue with lethal defensive aid to Ukraine, but also, of course, NATO troops to NATO countries that border Ukraine. Everything that can be done, not only in terms of actual support in terms of goods being sent to Ukraine, but also the moral support that comes from bolstering countries bordering that country. That's important for the morale of the Ukrainian people. And ultimately, if the Ukrainian people believe that the Western world is on their side, that there is huge support, if they have that sense of belief, that can genuinely change what happens on the ground and make the Ukrainian people, 55 million of them, resist the Russian attempted occupation.
Another busy day in politics, another busy day for you. You'll be back with your programme, 9:30, The Briefing. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.